Dear viewers, welcome to the RO channel. This is a special interview podcast featuring Márk Zéll, Джеймс Γκόσαρτ, and Τζόναθαν Κωνσταντίνου speaking. And I'm going to pass on the chair to Jim Γκόσαρτ. Our topic for today is Biden's trip to the Middle East. Jim.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Jim Γκόσαρτ. I'm Vice President of Republicans Overseas. And we're really fortunate to have both Jonathan Constantine and Márk Zéll with us today. Jonathan is President of Republicans Overseas Greece. Márk is President of Republicans Overseas Israel. Both are prominent attorneys locally. Today is July 19th, 2022. President Biden has just left the Middle East, and the trip, by all accounts, was, even by the White House comments, was quite disappointing. Now, we wanted to do this podcast because the reporting that we've been seeing in the US media primarily has really been very, very superficial. Yet the issues that were addressed or should have been addressed during the Biden trip are really major geopolitical issues. And in particular, with Márk being on the call, Márk was the spokesman, virtually the spokesman for the Republican Party in Israel during the Biden visit. And I really wanted to capture Márk's input on the trip there. But a couple of these issues also overlap with Greece and with other issues involving the Eastern Mediterranean. So it's really great to have both Jonathan and Márk on this call. And I'd like to start, Márk, and ask you a question about the trip. First, regarding the Iran and the nuclear deal. The New York Times characterized this as if Israel and the U.S. are on the same page regarding the Iran deal, with Biden favoring diplomacy as an approach, whereas Prime Minister Lapid favors more of an any means necessary approach to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Márk, what's really going on here, and what is the significance of this?
Well, thanks, Jim, and Jonathan. Good evening to you there in Athens. I'd like to make this general comment. I mean, the real question is, why did President Biden make this trip in the first place, right? And I would think that there are probably two answers if we can size it. The main purpose of this trip had to do with Iran, really. It had primarily to do with the Biden administration's attempt to deal with the crisis caused by the spike in gas prices and the cancellation of American energy independence. The idea was to go to the Saudi Arabia primarily. That was the primary focus of the trip. To persuade the Saudis to increase their output, their production, so as to allow a greater inflow of crude oil into the United States, and thereby reducing gas prices. You can't talk, however, about the Middle East without talking about Iran, because Iran is, and the threat that Iran poses to Israel and to the Arab states, and generally to all the states here in the Middle East, is really the foundation upon which President Trump in the prior administration reconfigured American foreign policy and the geopolitics in order to create the foundation for what we all know as the Abraham Accords, a revolution in Middle East diplomacy, which during his administration bore fantastic fruits as Israel normalized relations with Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco and Sudan, and opened a channel, an overt channel, to the Saudis. The hope was that had Trump been reelected, that the relationship with Saudi Arabia would be added to the Abraham Accords. Those agreements exist only because all the nations in question have a common adversary. That's Iran. Now, President Trump, to his credit, during his administration, pulled the United States out of what's called the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran, because the Iranians were systematically violating that agreement from the get-go. With President Biden's election, he put it like was the case when he was vice president in the Obama administration. They put a very heavy emphasis on reestablishing that JCPOA with Iran, bringing America back into the consortium of states that entered into that agreement in the first place back in 2015. This sent a chilling message, really a frightening message, to all of the partners in the Abraham Accords, the growing alliance in the Middle East between Israel and the Arab states against the Iranian threat. Because it seemed to indicate that America was flipping on Iran. And if America flipped and went soft on Iran, then the whole basis for this new configuration, this new geopolitical configuration in the Middle East was rendered nugatory, just erased. And that caused Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, to begin incredibly to reach out to Iran just to cover themselves in the event the Americans really were going to radically change their policy towards Tehran. When the president came to Israel, Iran was the principal topic of discussion. Now, when he came to Israel, he came at a time when Israeli politics was itself in a kind of shambles, following the dissolution of the government under about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the new prime minister, Yair Lapid, was only 2 or 3 days in office when the president landed last Wednesday. But there is a wall-to-wall consensus, fair to say, in Israel among the various political parties, which is something very unusual in Israel, that when it comes to Iran, there's no negotiating. There's got to be a strong front against the Iranian nuclear threat. And that means, in order for that to happen, you need a strong voice from Washington. So when Lapid met with President Biden, and when the Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, and the head of the Israeli Armed Forces, the chief of the General Staff, Kochavi, met with President Biden and his people, the question was, is America going to confront the Iranians seriously, or are they going to continue to pursue this diplomatic quest for this impossible agreement? And unfortunately, Lapid and Gantz and Kochavi and the Israeli leadership did not get a clear American answer from the president. He waffled, as he is wont to do. And that has sent earthquakes here in Israel. And not only here in Israel, also in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf states. That's my initial answer to your question, Jim. I understand I covered a lot of ground there, but I wanted to give you a full account.
Yeah, but all significant stuff, and all the kind of stuff that just wasn't appearing in the New York Times or any place that I saw in American media. In fact, you mentioned the the impact that Biden's lack of decisiveness, lack of commitment has had on other allies. Did I read correctly today that, and it was just one very brief line, I think I saw in the Wall Street Journal, that the UAE has resent an ambassador to Iran? And if so, did that actually happen? And how significant is that?
It did.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I'm confirming the information.
Yeah,
Wow.
look,
I mean,
it's definitely
monumental.
true. It's definitely true, and it reflects exactly the kinds of concerns. I mean, these countries have like Israel, are faced with an existential threat from Iran, and if the Americans are not in the game, wholeheartedly in the game, they've got to cover their bases. Now, Israel doesn't have the option that the Saudis and the Gulf states have in terms of turning to Iran. We don't have that option, and Iran's nuclear threat is aimed principally at Israel. Okay, and that's a very serious problem here that's causing everybody in this country to be very, very concerned. And we are preparing. I mean, I have to tell you that in Israel, I don't think this has been widely reported, but the army is now talking about preparing the population for a nuclear. That's something we've never had happen here. We prepared for missile attacks. We've had missile attacks. We've had chemical weapon attacks, but a nuclear attack. This is something that's new and concerned. Obviously, is concerning all of us here.
Yes, and yet little was said in the reporting about the Palestinian issue. It almost seems, though, as if there's a tacit recognition that the Abraham Accords, that's a policy that, although they don't refer to them, and certainly don't credit President Trump for those accords, they are in fact following the results of those agreements, are they not?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think they give lip service to upholding the Abraham Accords and even expanding them. But if the American policy towards Iran remains obtuse and unclear, the chances of expanding the Abraham Accords are very, very small, because they rest on that, as I indicated, on the assumption that we have a common adversary and we need to work against them against that adversary and defend with a common defense. If Washington is not in the game, is not playing its role, the basis for that cooperation is diminished. There's another thing I think that has not been overly reported, or reported really much in the American media, except maybe on Fox News. And that is that the American plan will involve releasing over the next 5 years, if the agreement is resurrected from an American point of view, will involve releasing something between $250 to $800 billion in assets to the Iranian regime. I mean, you remember that when Obama initially entered into the JCPOA in 2015, we had the story of the airplane that went over with these pallets of cash and gold that were delivered over just under $2 billion were delivered to the hands of the Iranians, who immediately proceeded to disperse them to their terror proxies around the region and the world. Can you imagine what would mean if that kind of money of just under $1 trillion is put in the hands of the premier terrorist state in the world? I mean, it's mind-boggling.
That alone is staggering. That one term alone it boggles the mind. But in fact, the terms of the Iran nuclear deal, as we understand it, is full of. I mean, it's one of the worst, most one-sided deals that you could imagine. I mean, the IRGC recognition, for example, holy cow, a recognition.
Yeah.
I mean, withdrawing the terrorist designation for the organization.
It's a Swiss cheese agreement that eliminated, does not address any kind of verification at all. The Iranians were violating the previous one from day one. There's no way that either the International Atomic Energy Agency or anybody, any of the parties to the JCPOA can go in under the current draft and monitor the Iranian activities. They are now given a green light basically to have a nuclear bomb by 2030. And the Iranians themselves have announced in the last few days that they now are capable, right now, within the next, immediately, to deploy a nuclear weapon. Now, Jim, you had asked me about the Palestinians. That was really a sideshow here. But for Israel, it also, this particular visit included some very, very troubling signals from the Biden administration. First, the Biden administration promised now to turn over $300 million in fungible cash to the Palestinian Authority. It's going to give another $200 million to the UNRWA, the refugee agency that takes care of the Palestinian so-called refugees in Gaza and the West Bank. This is after the previous administration under President Trump and Vice President Pence had completely terminated all American assistance to the Palestinians because they were sending large percentages of that relief money to families of terrorists who actually committed terrorist acts against Israel and other targets. So can you imagine that? That's the way it starts. The second thing he says, Biden paid this visit to East Jerusalem. Okay. Now, under President Trump, Jerusalem was united under Israeli sovereignty. That was one of the great achievements of the Trump administration. And President Trump never visited the Palestinian contingent in Jerusalem. It was always outside of Jerusalem, Bethlehem or maybe Ramallah, I don't remember, Bethlehem certainly. But Biden paid what he called a private visit, which is a bunch of hokum, to the Augusta Victoria Hospital in East Jerusalem, which is under Palestinian control or Palestinian administration. And when he drove there in the Beast, this Cadillac that he brought I think a whole convoy of these things, he took off the Israeli flag. Before the president's vehicle had an American flag and an Israeli flag as it drove around on Wednesday and Thursday during his visit here. When he went Friday morning to the east to Jerusalem, which is part of Israel under Israeli sovereignty, he took off the Israeli flag. Moreover, when the Israeli government said, we would like to send a representative of the government along with you to the visit to Jerusalem, to East Jerusalem, the Americans said, absolutely not. Another slap in the face. And then we had his visit to Bethlehem, where he met with the Palestinian president. He hasn't been elected since 2007. So what is that? 15 years this guy has been ruling the Palestinian Authority without any kind of mandate from the people, no elections, nothing. And he went to visit him in Bethlehem. And what did the Palestinians say to him? They said to him, the Jews have no connection to the land of Israel. Jerusalem has no connection to the Jewish people. Notwithstanding everything that's written in the Bible and all the archaeology and everything else, this was the message. And the president remained mum. Didn't say.
Wow.
What he did say after having, and this is something I recently discussed with a journalist here this morning, the press in the United States did not publish the transcript of the President Biden's remarks in Bethlehem. If they would have, it would have been another fiasco for the president, because it was a stream of consciousness, mumbling, babbling kind of thing that nobody could understand. He talked about his late son. He talked about all kinds of things that told jokes that he tells on every occasion, and completely incomprehensible. But one of the things he did say is that he drew this parallel between his Irish background. I think there's a question whether he really has an Irish background, but let's say that he does, and the Palestinian cause. Okay, in other words, the struggle for Irish independence against the British, in Biden's own words, is comparable to the Palestinian struggle against the Jewish people in the land of Israel, the very homeland of the Jewish people, which the Palestinians deny. Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing. And what about the consulate? Was there any talk about the consulate? Now, President Trump, of course, famously moved the embassy to Jerusalem. President Biden wisely has not messed with that decision, but now you got this issue with the consulate in
all right, so let me explain that to the viewers. Yeah, let me explain this to the viewers, okay? You're right. President Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. He also did something else. This is something actually I was involved with and had recommended this from the very beginning. He closed the Jerusalem consulate, which had been functioning for 150 years, the United States consulate in Jerusalem. And since 1967, the Jerusalem consulate was basically a U.S. embassy to the Palestinian, to the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, okay? And it did not report to the American ambassador to Israel. It had a separate chain of command, a reporting system directly to the State Department in Washington with no connection to Israel. And so when President Trump decided to move the embassy, we strongly encouraged him, and he did, close the consulate and make the American ambassador to Israel the sole point of contact for all affairs that concern the land of Israel, pre-67 Israel, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, Gaza, and so on. And that's what it was on January 20th, 2021. When Biden came in, he promised to do this during the election, and he appointed Antony Blinken to be a Secretary of State. They decided they were going to reopen the Jerusalem consulate. Now, what does that mean? That's a direct statement that Jerusalem is no longer the capital of Israel. It's open for negotiation, right? Something that we thought that had been finally settled by the Trump administration. The whole plan to reopen the consulate was an attempt to negate that. Now, one of the things that we did, I was involved with it along with many people here, was to get the Israeli government under international law not to agree to the reopening of the American consulate in Jerusalem. And fortunately, one of the few things that the Israeli government, which has now been dissolved, did was to resist this, and the Americans pulled back. They didn't say they weren't going to give up on doing this. What they did is they came up with a ruse, kind of a subterfuge. And what was that? They were going to now create something called the Office of Palestinian Affairs, okay, in Jerusalem, put it in its own house where the former consulate was based, and upgrade the diplomatic person. He was a White House guy called Hadi Amr, I think is his name. Upgrade him to ambassadorial status, right, without getting the Israeli approval, and thereby do what they do by indirection what the Israeli government and the American government couldn't do by direct action, by reopening the consulate. And Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, and Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, talked about this consistently, both on the plane over and while they were in Israel. The president didn't say anything about that, but his top advisors, including his Secretary of State, did. What's the message? Not something that made a lot of Israelis and supporters of Israel very happy. And
again, another issue that has not been reported in the U.S. media.
Not
to that depth, Mark. Not to that depth. This is amazing stuff. I'd like to change gears just a little bit because energy certainly was a major topic. In fact, it was
Jim,
the principal reason.
Jim, may I interject here? And American diplomats have been putting a lot of pressure on friendly countries like Greece to recognize a two-state solution. Just a few days ago, the Greek foreign minister, Mr. Dendias, much to everybody's surprise over here, because theoretically Greece and Israel have been supporting increased relations. Mr. Dendias, at the bequest of the American ambassador, the outgoing American ambassador, announced that Greece is steadfast in favor of a two-state solution in Israel, and then naturally that Greece would never be thinking of opening up an embassy in Jerusalem, something which is a sore point in Greek-Israeli relations. But this was not a decision of the Greek government. It was forced upon them by the United States, the Greek desk of the State Department. Wow,
pressure you just don't hear about. If I may, I'd like to change the topic to energy. It was the single most important issue that was on the minds of the Biden team as they went to the Middle East. But there's, and I want to start it really with Germany and the EU because they're facing potential catastrophe.
Actually, the Russians have already closed down Nord Stream 1 as well. And
they have. Will it reopen? Everybody's got their fingers crossed that they will.
No.
But what Germany has done, I kind of have to agree with you guys. But what Germany has done, I would give them credit for jumping on doing certain things that otherwise would have been very unpopular until recently. They have leased some LNG platforms, floating FRGUs, I think they're called FGR. They've approved the construction of LNG permanent terminals. They're engaging in long-term gas agreements with, one with the United States. I think there's another with Azerbaijan, if I'm not mistaken. Long-term agreements which fly in the face of what the climate,
fanatics.
What the climate lobby, the climate lobby, climate fanatics are pushing not to enter into any such long-term agreements because we're going to get rid of fossil fuel in 5 or 10 years. So there's a recognition on the part of Germany that natural gas, fossil fuels are going to be here to stay. And yet, there doesn't seem to be any, let me just finish the question, because I want to ask you this one primarily, Jonathan. There doesn't seem to be any recognition of developing the Eastern Mediterranean gas. Jonathan, what's your take on this?
It's such a hypocritical move to beg for more gas when the Biden administration murdered, not killed, the East Med project, which it would have been able to allow Israel, Egypt, and Greece to send their natural gas deposits. And we're talking about trillion cubic feet. But that's not the whole story. The Arab countries are preparing for, which actually was an idea by the Strategic Studies Institute. Mark, you were there, present, when we floated the idea a few years ago, that it would be a great idea for the Arab nations of the Gulf to build pipelines from the Gulf to Egypt and then have it shipped by sea and by pipeline. And we're talking both natural gas and oil. And this project was killed by the Biden administration. Now, the reason being for that, and this is a fact which I will present to you, The Biden administration has a lot of people in it that are active supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood is a organization which was founded in late 1920s in Egypt. And it turned out by the 1930s to be funded by the German Nazi Party and was anti-British, anti-colonial. After the decline of Nazism, which still is alive and well in the Arab countries, and not only, the Muslim Brotherhood found a new foothold. This new foothold was Constantinople and the Turkish administration. Now, a lot of these people have a lot of influence in Washington. Let me give a few names. Elvir Klempik, who is a Muslim Brotherhood operative, is on the Democratic Party payroll and very high ranking. Amos Hochstein, who happens to be President Biden's, though he is a Jew, he has been, he's on the payroll of the MB, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Turkey. He has contracts there. And I can go on rambling for hours, naming all the Muslim Brotherhood operatives in Kamala Harris and Biden's. Jake Sullivan has attended a lot of their functions. And we see that their influence in the new administration is great. Under the previous administration, Mike Pompeo suggested the 3+1 project, which would mean that Greece, Israel, and Cyprus, with the possible addition later of Egypt, would be allies, an alliance that would be guaranteed by the United States. And the reason for this alliance was to secure the energy products which would have been shipped from these countries to Europe. Now, the Biden administration, come January 6th, on the day from January 7th, already killed all this energy independence. And now, after a few years, a few months, it's about a year and a half, is begging around the world for gas and oil, which A, America is not willing to produce herself because of the green freaks. B, America has dictated to many countries not to use their energy products for supplying the energy market. So now we see that the prices have gone completely overboard. And even Saudi Arabia is actually buying Russian oil and reselling it to the United States. Now, in the terms of this trip, it was one of the worst prepared trips I've ever seen. I don't think that anybody was in the Biden administration cared about Iran. For them, Iran is a sacred cow. They just want to get back on the JCPOA. The solution to Biden is print a lot of money, send it out wherever. Don't worry about the bill afterwards, and try to appease people by stuffing money down their throats. What they don't understand, fail to understand, or they don't care, or maybe they're even making a personal cut out of it, is that no matter how much money you give to fanatics, they're always going to double cross you. Because this was a general idea between the original Iran deal. Give them a lot of cash and hope that they won't build a bomb that they will use against the West. Well, sorry to tell you guys, but who are listening to us, the first thing Iran is going to do when it builds that, manage to build the bomb, and it will build it, and it may practically have it ready yet. I mean, my info speaks of July. It's a few weeks old, but we had a timeline for July, August for the possible production of their first nuclear weapon. We're talking this year. The first thing that Iran's going to do when they get their hands on a nuke is send them packing to the West that's been oppressing them for so many years. They're fanatics. We just don't understand it. We fail to understand it. Or, worst They're just playing their Chinese master's game. And one of the reasons we had suggested, Mark, the pipelines from the Bahrain, Saudi Arabia to Egypt was to avoid the possibility of the Chinese using Iran as a choke point to cut off the Hormuz Straits. Apart from the fact that it makes great business sense to shave off 7,000 miles off of the sea journey of transferring oil. And in a market like today, where the prices are so high, I'm talking the prices of transport, the fewer miles you have to transport goods over, or energy goods, the cheaper it will become. But coming to the Saudi production question, it was a joke for Biden to ask the Saudis to raise their production. Anybody in the energy market knows that their production levels can be only increased by 1 or 2%. I mean, from 11 million, maybe they can go to 11.2, 11.3. They just don't have enough oil. America, on the other hand, has huge amounts of oil, which the green freaks are stopping the administration from drilling. Obviously, the administration doesn't want to drill. And I'm saying the administration because my estimation that Biden just doesn't have a clue of what the beep is going on in the energy. His cognitive status is so bad. I don't think he comprehends the complexities of how the business world works. Maybe 5-10 years ago, maybe. And then again, don't forget that Biden had a very, in his position in the Senate Subcommittee for Foreign Affairs, had a very notorious fights with both Israeli and Cypriot politicians. He's always been way over on the left in certain of these issues. And I'm sure Mark is aware. I remember his almost fist fight in the on the House floor with the Israeli president. You will remind me of his name.
Menachem Begin.
Yeah, with Begin.
Yeah,
it's famous.
Mark, your thoughts on the East?
Biden doesn't like Israel. I mean, that's the only thing I'm certain of. Even in this poor cognitive status now, he doesn't like Israel.
It comes across very very obviously. Mark, your thoughts on wide open, really the whole subject.
I'm sorry, Jim, I didn't get that. No, go ahead.
I just said I was about to say your thoughts on the energy situation, but really your thoughts wide open on this entire topic.
Well, we have a couple of things. First of all, Jonathan mentioned Amos Hochstein. He was on this trip, okay? And his role, and the reason he was on the trip is, among other things, is that he's responsible for trying to mediate the dispute between Israel and Lebanon regarding the sea boundary in their economic zones and their respective rights to drill for gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. And nothing was achieved there at all in that respect. And the reason is because Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, put the kibosh on any Lebanese government deal with the Israelis about simply defining who owns what in the economic zone in the Eastern Mediterranean, where they can drill for gas. They had something worked out, and that would have allowed both countries to produce gas and for their own use and for export, but that didn't happen. Jonathan correctly pointed out about how the Biden administration killed the Eastern Mediterranean gas project that the Trump administration had backed, which would have provided, had it gone through, trillions, I think I'm getting this right, order of magnitude of cubic feet of natural gas for Germany and the Europeans who are going to be freezing in this coming winter. It's really horrific. what's going on, because the Germans, I mean, to a large extent, they're responsible for this, didn't listen to President Trump's warnings that they should not be putting all of their eggs in the Russian energy basket, and develop their own sources, including from the United States. So, but now they're facing a winter where they're not going to have enough energy to heat their homes. I mean, and to carry on their businesses. This is terrible. In Saudi Arabia, we haven't talked to. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jonathan. Go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
It's a lunacy. The reason that the Russian gas is, let's say, sounds nice to the Germans is because it's so cheap that they can resell it to the rest of Europe, because that's half of the money Germany was making is from reselling to other European countries. I remember, for instance, a few months ago, I checked that they were buying at the $40, let's say, dollars per 1,000 cubic feet, and selling it for about 180 to the Polish government. Now, the Germans, the funny thing is that, don't forget, Germans and Turks are very long time allies, and the Turks are cultivating the Muslim Brotherhood, which is trying to influence and take over the Palestinian, let's say, cause. Not that there is a Palestinian cause, but they fearing that they would get competition from the East Med, they killed the East Med together with Amos Stein, Biden, and all his cronies. And now they got the end of the stick, because the Russians decided, well, we're not so happy with you Germans. You're making too much money off of us, because why should we make the profits from selling the gas at real market prices? That's one thing that people don't know in Europe. Germany's making humongous amounts of money out of the gas, and that's why the Russians are limiting the amount of gas, because at first they told the Germans, listen, you want the gas, it's going to be for your own personal, your own country's use. We're not going to stand for you making 10 times the amount of profit. And Russia's been using the gas as an economic weapon, and very, very, very successfully, because they've financed the whole war and 3 times over. By the record amounts of profits.
Yeah, I want to mention something about the Ukraine war too, Jonathan and Jim. One of the things that the Biden administration really twisted the Israelis' arms to in the Jerusalem Declaration, which was signed on Thursday, a whole paragraph whereby the Israelis were going to be supporting the Americans. And their support of the Ukrainian side in the Russian-Ukrainian war, something Israel has tried to avoid assiduously, because we have a very large Russian-speaking population in Israel, close to 2 million people out of a total of 9 million, and we have also very close ties with economic and other ties, cultural ties with Russia, which is based on the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of Jews living there. The Russians retaliated against the Israeli government by shutting down all the activities of the Jewish Agency, which takes care of the Russian Jews in Russia, and other things, in order to retaliate against Israel's support or leaning to the West. I think we also ought to talk about the Saudi visit. Jim, with your permission. There was a lot of attention in the United States media given to what I would consider really kind of a silly aspect. You know, the fist bump that Biden exchanged with Mohammed ibn Salman. Yeah, ibn Salman, the crown prince, who was responsible apparently for the murder of the Washington Post reporter, an American citizen, this Jamal Khashoggi, in Turkey. and not only the murder, but the dismemberment of his body and everything else. And Biden had been, during the campaign, had made these very, very powerful statements about Saudi Arabia being a pariah state, and how he would never have anything to do with him because of this murder and so on. And here he is, kind of limping over to the crown prince, doing his fist bump, and which a lot of people interpret as being even more intimate than a handshake, and the whole, and then claiming, apparently lying about the fact that he raised this issue with the Saudi crown prince, that is the Khashoggi murder and so on, and that turned out that the Saudis completely denied that. So, I mean, this on its face, in addition to the fact that he didn't get any kind of Saudi concessions regarding increased production, and as Jonathan indicated, not that the Saudis could have in any significant manner in any case, but he embarrassed himself, and he embarrassed the United States, and he embarrassed the American people, and came back to Washington with absolutely nothing from his Middle East visit, and contributed. And what the greatest crime here, in my view, that's is that in communicating, because he failed, and because he embarrassed himself and the American government, he is encouraging America's adversaries, and whether it be China or Russia or North Korea or Iran, or Venezuela. I mean, this is the part that really is painful as an American citizen, that to see our president so helpless, so hopeless, as he tries to make this, as Jonathan indicated, this poorly planned major trip abroad, only to come back not only empty-handed, but worse off geopolitically and politically than was the case when he left. It's unpardonable.
For sure.
I think
Mark and Jonathan, the stuff you guys are bringing up is amazing. I can tell you it goes into way more depth than what is being reported here. Jonathan, if I may, go ahead.
Before you ask me that question, in my term as being a political analyst, apart from my normal job, I always check with politicians to find out who their advisors are. Rarely do you get a politician being able to fully comprehend all issues. And basically any person in a position of authority is based on the information relayed to him by his inferiors, his subordinates. So apart from the fact that I feel that Biden is in no position to make a informed decision, and as the fact, as you were saying about the Khashoggi, I don't think he even remembers all the things he said about Khashoggi. I mean, the guy doesn't remember where he was in the morning, or much less but that's a different story. So when I see all these advisors who are, I wouldn't hire as an assistant to my gardener. I mean, these guys are just woke trash. They don't know almost anything about. I mean, I remember Blinken being ridiculed by the Chinese on his first conference in Alaska, and make the comparison to Mike Pompeo's team and the Trump team. I mean, how different the people were. I mean, you had the best of the best, and here you have the woke of the worst.
And Jonathan, all of this catastrophe in American foreign policy in the Middle East stems from an event that we're going to be noting the anniversary of in a few weeks. This retreat from Afghanistan.
From Afghanistan.
That is what gave
it wasn't a retreat.
That leads
it was a panic route. It was a route.
A route, okay.
That leads right
Fair-
into the
fair
question
enough.
I wanted to ask.
He left background air base to the Chinese, and that was a route.
$90 billion. Let me ask, we've been online here, I think 35, maybe 40 minutes. I want to
50
ask both of you a similar question. Oh, okay. The issue really, this may be a good point to wrap, but see what you guys think. I want to ask each of you to comment on a quote from the Wall Street Journal today, because it speaks to the issue of trust and credibility of the United States. Mark, really both of you have touched on this in different ways. So I'm quoting from an op-ed titled "Biden Should Have Stayed Home." It is written by Karen Elliott House, July 1922. She writes, "This trip was worse than a missed opportunity. It damaged U.S. security interests in the Middle East by heightening to the world that neither Saudi Arabia nor other Gulf states trust the U.S. enough to make any sacrifices to renew badly frayed relations. In a speech to Arab leaders, the president proclaimed, 'We will not walk away and leave a vacuum to be filled by China, Russia, or Iran.'" She goes on to say, to your point, Jonathan, "That fell on doubting ears from a man they watched walk away from Afghanistan." Jonathan, what do you think about that? And Mark, what are your comments on that? I think the whole question of what has this trip done to trust and credibility of the United States?
Well, I'm going to give an answer figuratively. I'm going to kind of do this, Biden, or shake hands with the air. American credibility is below zero. It's below zero because people in Asia, in Europe, maybe not a liberal local Europe, see crazy pictures like certain doggy style ministers or functionaries, and everything is about wokeism, about trans rights, about whatever, and nothing is about the American power, whether it's military or economic. They see the American military doing transgender studies and woke CRT agendas. They don't see Americans actually fighting and projecting American military presence. Actually, what they see is America with running away from each issue with our tail between our legs. So, if you ask me, as a citizen of the world, as a European, but somebody who knows the Middle East quite well, the Arab world, nobody respects America. It's something that has been coming for the last year, and this trip really made things worse. But having said that, I mean, this administration is doing whatever it can to tarnish the American power issue. And the Ukraine war is another show of how poorly and nobody has thought out the consequences of our action. Politics, real politics, have actions and reactions. Politics is not a baby carrying a gun and shooting off and trying to impress its kid friends. Things are much more complicated, and unfortunately, all the people that realize the complexity of all these issues have been replaced with woke fanatics. Mark,
I think it's worthy, Jim and Jonathan, to note that today, July 19th, is the anniversary of the American landing on the moon in 1969 with with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, Mike Scott. That was at a time of American greatness. In fact, throughout most of the last 100 years, America has been really a light unto the nations of the protector of freedom and democracy, of struggling against communists and other totalitarian regimes. This has been the America that the world looks to. This is why millions of people, are coming illegally states of this American dream. Now we have to get that control. But today, within a very short period of time, 18 months, it's almost incredible to think about this. This president and his Democratic administration has weakened the American society, American economy, and for our purposes, Jim, America's standing in the world. We are a laughing stock, and we are not generating trust and confidence among our allies like Israel and the Gulf states and Egypt and Taiwan and friends all over the globe on American leadership, but are seeing American retreat, American weakness. And this, and I'll close with this, Jim. We have elections coming up in just a few weeks, really, in November 8th, and where the American people will be able to have a say in who is now going to be controlling the House of Representatives and the Senate of the United States. After all the silliness that's going on, all this, as Jonathan pointed out, all this woke fanaticism and this climate fanaticism and ideological policy making that's just ignoring the needs of ordinary people, both within and without the United States. Our chance, the one chance we have now to begin to set the stage for an American comeback. And here's what I believe. I believe in America, Jim. Even here in the Middle East, we look to America and we believe in the strength of the American people and the wisdom of the American people. And I believe that in November, they are going to step up and take the future of America into their own hands, recover the Congress, and put it in the hands of the Republicans so that we can begin to put a stop to all this craziness that's been going on this week in America, at home and abroad. Thank you, Jim.
Terrific, Mark. Yeah, terrific, Mark. And Jonathan, you know, I think we all believe in the strength of the United States of America. We all believe in this great experiment that is the United States of America. Our best days are truly in the future. And I think this is a good point to remind and ask all the, hopefully the many overseas Americans living abroad who are going to be watching this. It's not too late for you to register to vote. It is not too late for you to make a difference in November and help stop what's happening here. Get in there and vote for your Republican candidates. Let's get the House and the Senate safely out of the hands of the Democrats who are really on a track to ruin our country, and let's set the stage for return of the White House in 2024. Jonathan and Mark, thank you very much. Jonathan, let me turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Jim. I would like to commend Mark on the lunar expedition and the memory. To go to the moon, my friends, you got to know math. But in modern America, math is racist. So if math is racist, we won't be going to the moon. We won't be going to other continents. We're going to end up in the dark ages with these climate woke freaks. Yes, go out and vote. If you haven't registered, register. Mark, I, Jim, in our respective territories, and all the Republicans overseas, we're here to help you. Register, whatever you need, we're there. In November, we want Make America Great candidates in the House, in the Senate, in the local authorities, in the state senates, in the governors. We want those MAGA candidates getting rid of this craziness, which is turning America into the new Uganda. I mean, Uganda is more respected than America. And there's only one reason for this decline, wokeism. And this craziness that's engulfing us. Make America great again, guys.